Light Haven, the podcast for all things spiritual, mystical, and energetic. My name is Bianca, light worker and astrology enthusiast.
And I'm Ruth, mystery student towards the awakening of consciousness.
The title of this episode is Resting in Inner Knowing. It is where we take a look into the inner workings of our intuition. I think we have some really interesting points to cover. Ruth, you have a starting place for us, some definition, if you will?
Yes, I do. I thought because intuition is one of those almost airy-fairy type topics, to get us on the right path, let's start with looking at the wiki definition of intuition.
Great place to start.
So, wiki defines it as the ability to acquire knowledge without recourse to conscious reasoning or needing an explanation. So it's just knowing without knowing how you know, without writing up pros and cons or making a list or consulting Google or anything. You just know. But if someone asks you why, you go, I don't know that. I just know this thing that I know. So in the modern business world, we really hype up intellectualism, and we even give people, like the things that I mentioned, pro-con lists, models and aids to assist people in how they access their intellectual capabilities. So list out the pros and cons. And I remember in many interviews in previous companies, the STAR acronym, which you might be familiar with.
The STAR acronym.
Yes, so the STAR acronym for interview, situation, task, action, result. And then you go, well, I can just follow that acronym and then I'll give a great response to the question. However, when we rely on these models and we become fixated on them, then we move out of our inner knowing or our gut sense and into our head. Now, our intellect is something that we focus a lot on recently in modern times. However, our intuition comes from millions of years of evolution and has an intelligence to it. That inner guidance does have a basis inside our physiology. So when people hear intuition, they might think, oh, that sounds like magic. That's not real. However, your brain is constantly filtering data and stimuli that are bombarding you from your environment. If you were to actually consciously perceive all of this information at once, you'd probably be lying on the floor making a starfish. You wouldn't be able to move or do anything. So in order for you to have suitable and helpful interactions with your environment, your brain absolutely has to filter out that information. But it doesn't mean the information is not received. So the information comes into your computer and it is all stored if and when it might be required in the subconscious level. So you do have your subconscious software that is carrying all of that data. Now, if it detects information that is helpful, it is sitting in the subconscious, but when you learn to tap into that, the information bubbles up as what we call inner knowing. But it is actually coming from your software, but it's a different operating system. Have you ever heard of the 3 brains theory?
No, I've not.
Okay. So we all know the brain that's in our head, and that's where we reason from. So the mind has our thoughts, ideas, concepts, reasoning, comparing. And then there's this theory that the other part to you is your emotional brain. And typically we don't say emotional brain, but there's an intelligence to our emotions, right? Our emotions give us information on whether something is safe for us or not, whether we should move towards or away from a certain situation. So there is an intelligence to it, hence the term emotional brain. All of those feelings and sentiments, while they can be upsetting or unnerving in the moment, they can be destabilizing. The key is to look for the information within them rather than being overwhelmed by them. And then we've also got our impulses or our sensations and movements. So, for example, if you touch something that's hot, your hand will immediately move back. So that's your motor brain, where, again, this is a particular way of describing it. You can say, no, that's my reflex. There's intelligence in that. You don't need to think about it, but your body knows how to do it. So that's also been referred to as the motor brain. So that's the three brains theory. And this theory actually comes from esotericism. Oh. So in esotericism, they say that we, the people, are called humanoids, and we have three brains. It's an intellectual... humanoids, because when you can elevate your level of awareness, then you become more than just a humanoid, more than robotic. So it's a differentiation in the terminology. But the three brains in esotericism are the intellectual brain, the emotional brain, and then the motor instinctual brain. Okay. So that's where all your instincts come from. And again, they're not actual physical brains. Obviously, we know there's not a brain sitting in your stomach or your heart, but it's a reference to the different aspects of your psyche. And it's just very organized. So this way of describing it helps you to understand the different types of information and reactions that you have, rather than everything's coming at me at once. I don't know how to make sense of it. It's a way of making sense of how we respond to our environment. So in this theory, each brain will function and operate on its own, and each has its own duties that it is responsible for. And so that's how sometimes when we're talking, we can speak from the mind. And when we're speaking from the mind, we have to really think about what we're saying. And it takes effort. And you think, oh, what was I going to say next? And that's where we're using the intellect and relying on certain models. It's very taxing. But when we speak from our instinct and our emotions, it doesn't require that active intellect. It comes out naturally. So that's why they always tell public speakers, you should speak from the heart, because it's going to be way easier than speaking from your head.
Yeah, I was thinking of that when you said speaking from the mind or the brain or something, and I was like, oh, there's the saying, speak from the heart, and I wonder if it has something to do with that. You know, all the speaking about the different areas of the brain. Have you heard of Neuralink, which is
I know of it. It's Elon Musk's exciting piece of software that a lot of people are scared of.
Yeah. Did you know that they've successfully implanted a chip in the first human a month ago, and they've completely recovered, and you can...
I've definitely heard that they did that. I don't know. I'll have to double check. I heard they were trying for a while, and then this was the successful one.
Yeah. So the study uses a robot to surgically place a brain-computer interface implant in a region of the brain that controls the intention to move. And Neuralink has said, adding that the initial goal is to enable people to control a computer cursor or keyboard using their thoughts. It's crazy, hey?
It is crazy. And to me, that shows us the mechanicity of what we are. Because if you can put software into it and we can operate the software, then clearly a part of us is already similarly a kind of software, albeit carbon-based, but it must be a kind of software that we are operating. And then you come to a very interesting question. Who's the one operating the software? And that's a big question that, scientists haven't been able to answer, where consciousness sits in the body. It's been an ongoing debate.
Yeah. So, watch this space. It'd be interesting to see how this develops and how it unfolds.
Would you get it?
I don't know. I haven't thought about whether I would or not. I'm just curious to see how it develops if it takes off or...
Definitely, I'd like to take a wait-and-see approach.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely a wait-and-see approach. I'm just very curious. Just very surprised that it actually was somewhat successful in the sense that this person can move the cursor. Like,
yeah,
they're moving it. I don't know if it's he or she, but yeah. It's interesting.
I think it's great for people who have certain conditions where it can allow them to access a better quality of life.
Yeah.
If we then all start putting chips into our brains for us, for example, to succeed at sports and work, I think that will be quite a chaotic period for humanity if that's the path we go down. But I don't see how we won't be going down that path from the looks of the way it's kicked off.
Yeah. It's definitely made a lot of people think about how close we are to actually developing. I think technology is closer to a breakthrough than I imagined, you know. I don't know. Interesting.
Definitely.
Food for thought. Anyway, back to the topic. So your intuition is, in my opinion, and this is all just how I view things, I'm speaking from the heart. Your intuition is your ability to tap into the universal consciousness. That connection is like a live circuit connecting you to the universal unconsciousness. That circuit is almost like the universe breathing air into your lungs, or like a baby in a mother's womb. It is like the umbilical cord. It is the connection that feeds us vital information. How we choose to recognize this connection is through our different senses, whether it's, which it's different for everyone. You could receive connection through different senses, a sense of feeling, maybe visualization. Maybe you notice something in your surroundings that prompt you, or it could just be thoughts that pop into your head. It could even be a still small voice telling you what to do. And it's actually, I want to raise this point because it's really important, that I feel like gets overlooked, and that it's important to understand that the history of the Western culture has led us to an anthropocentric, I don't know how to say... Anthropocentric, yeah. Such a mouthful.
Those long words.
Exactly. Anthropocentric way of viewing ourselves. As in, we believe that we are the central and most important element of existence. We've separated ourselves from the world by believing we're the subject and everything else, aka the world and the heavens, is the object. And I want to quote something out of a book that I've been reading by Richard Tarnas, who is a professor and founding director of the Philosophy, Cosmology and Consciousness graduate program at the California Institute of Integral Studies. And this quote highlights the problem with the Western mind, and upon critical self-reflection, he says, let us apply that meaning and purpose the human mind perceives in the universe does not exist intrinsically in the universe, but is constructed and is projected onto it by the human mind. To assume that the exclusive source of all meaning and purpose in the universe is ultimately centered in the human mind, which is therefore absolutely unique and special, and in this sense superior to the entire cosmos. So basically what he's saying there is he's pointing out that isn't this such an anthropic thing to do, to take any significance received by the universe as not by the universe, but actually by our own minds, as if it's the only source of truth, therefore making it superior. And then he goes on to say, To base our entire worldview on the a priori principle that whenever human beings perceive any patterns of psychological or spiritual significance in the non-human world, any signs of interiority and mind, any suggestion of purposefully coherent order and intelligible meaning, these must be understood as no more than human constructions and projections, as ultimately rooted in the mind and never in the world. So, and that's taken from Cosmos and Psyche, written by Richard Tarnas on page 35 in chapter 1. So he's saying that, and I'm just going to liken it to the topic, intuition is first believing that you have a connection to the universe. Like, without this, you will receive prompts believing that this is coming from within you, and yes, it is coming from within you. Like you said, that gut feeling, you don't know, you can't explain where it came from, but you know it just came from somewhere within. So yes, believing that it came from within you, but only that is not quite entirely true. It's also recognizing that what is going on within, inside us, is a reflection of what's going on the outside. And so I think intuition is a tool that we all have within us, and it is a way the universe can connect with us to help guide us through our life journey.
I always feel like I go back to science and what we can demonstrate, because I have this kind of fear that people just can't just accept, okay, well, I know it and that's good enough. Like when they deliver tragic fatality news to a parent whose child has sadly deceased in a war, the parent often knows before they knock on the door.
Exactly.
And how do you explain that? Mm-hmm. And when you were sharing those quotes, I was thinking that actually for us to think that we're the ones who get to say what the meaning of the universe is, and that whatever we, at our level of intellect, can prove is what's true, is actually quite arrogant.
Exactly. And so it's just proving the point that we are the subject, we are the center, and everything else is the object, and we get to project that meaning out. And it's rather than having it be a mutually receptive thing. Yeah, it's such an interesting book, and it's made me think a lot about the scientific way of thinking and reasoning, and how we feel like we have to prove the spiritual aspect of something in a scientific way in order for it to be validated.
Yeah, and to be fair, maybe you can prove it with science. A lot of these things do have research around them. But do we need that when, if your gut or your heart is telling you something, you should take this job, you shouldn't take this job, don't go down that alley. You don't need to wait for science to tell you something about that. You should follow it because there's a basis for it. Mm-hmm. And I'm reminded of one time many years ago where I was working on a customs clearance project, and at the time reporting to someone I will call Bill. And I was responsible for setting up how the project was going to work. And we were clearing a very difficult to clear type of product. And so there were very specific protocols around how the documentation needed to be done for customs. And it was very high volumes. So when I designed the process, I actually had this feeling in my gut, which I did not listen to, but something in my gut said that my design was flawed. But I also couldn't think of another way to do it. And my boss, Bill, said, I'll let you run the project however you want. However, my gut tells me that process is not going to work. And I said, what's the alternative? The alternative that he suggested, I really didn't like. So I went ahead with what I had designed. And sure enough, about a week and a half into the project, we found there were major errors. And I wasn't even that experienced with the type of design that I was doing. However, my gut was already telling me that I needed to rethink what I was setting up there.
Yeah.
I didn't listen to it, and I paid for it because we lost so much time trying to fix those places where the wrong paperwork had gone to the wrong item. Lucky nothing had shipped, but a lot of boxes had to be reopened to double check. And it's not easy designing that kind of process. So it was new for me, but even, my gut was telling me, and I didn't listen to it. There was another time I recall, also some years ago, where I was in the position of hiring a new team member. And this person came in named Sarah. And she had been a business consultant with some massive achievements. And something in my gut told me, no matter what she said in the interview and how good she sounded, something in my gut said, don't hire her. She's not going to last here. And she actually, said so many things that sounded really, really good. So in the end, I overrode that feeling and I said, you know what, but so-and-so has recommended her and this and that. And I had all these reasons that came out of my intellect why I should hire her. And I felt sick in my stomach as I was doing it. And I was completely detached, not listening to that feeling. And sure enough, she didn't last. So then when I reflected back on that, I thought, I need to get better at listening to that feeling in my gut.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because while you were sharing your stories, I couldn't help but think that there was a couple of thoughts that came to my mind. One of them was how disconnected we can be when we don't listen to our intuition. It's like a muscle. If we don't exercise it, we become numb to it, and when we become disconnected, it's ultimately us becoming disconnected to the universe. And how can we be guided, and how can we know that we are on the right path and fulfilling our life purpose in whatever way, shape or form, when we've completely cut ourselves off from the source? You know what I mean? And then second of all, I thought to myself, how when we don't listen to our intuition, how much the universe was relying on us to help be an agent in someone else's life. Because it's that thing of, hey, I'm getting this gut feeling that maybe you shouldn't get on the train today, or,
That's so hard to do, because we don't have a culture of accepting intuition. So if you have this feeling that someone shouldn't go somewhere and you're feeling that for them.
It's the Western culture.
Yeah, no one's going to listen to you.
Yeah. So, I just couldn't help but think about those things and how important it is to stay connected. Now, you say, I've heard people say, stay connected to yourself. Yes, definitely, stay connected to yourself. And by doing that, you have that understanding that by connecting to your inner self, you're inadvertently connecting to the outer and the source, as it will,
Yes, and I do have an example of where I did listen to my gut, because it's not just all me being disconnected. So over my lifetime to date, I have purchased 4 properties. And each time I did a small amount of research. And, in Asian culture, there's this thing of feng shui, which is tapping into the energy of a land, the buildings, the layout, and not necessarily going through a checklist, but just feeling how the energy flows. So I'm not saying that I'm a feng shui expert, but there is that concept. And whenever I had gone into any of these properties, I actually based my decision off of feeling. And some people might say, oh, that was careless, but it was that knowing kind of feeling.
Yes. Yeah.
It wasn't an impulse feeling. It was the intuition that we're referring to. And I have to say, each of these purchases did lead to wonderful improvements for me over the years. So for me personally, I do acknowledge that it was the higher aspect of me, or my higher self, that was assisting me in those moments.
Yeah. Wow. And it's gotten you to where you are today. So, or it's all had a hand in helping you get to where you are now.
Yes. I will share one story that I came across, because I know those are my personal stories, but sometimes when you hear how intuition helped certain people, it's really powerful, and it's a great example of what intuition can do for you, how it can keep you safe. But this example is quite lighthearted. It's kind of funny. So I'm just going to read it as it was shared. This is not my personal story, it's someone else's. So they said, I was helping a very close friend of mine back from the bar because he was too drunk to walk. When we got back to his apartment, he started to make a move on me. I dodged him, and he burned me with the cigarette he was holding.
Oh my gosh.
I was petrified. He started pulling me towards his room. Suddenly, just then, my phone started ringing. I was getting a call from a friend I hadn't spoken to in almost a year. I answered and immediately said, "Your brother's in hospital? I'll be there as soon as I can." That's how I got myself out of that situation. Then, after I was safe, I called my friend back, and he said he'd gotten this sudden gut feeling that I was in trouble and he needed to call me right away.
That was exactly what I was thinking. How, if we don't follow our intuition, how do we not know that we are being the agent in someone else's life? And I know we can't go around thinking, oh, I'm going to listen to my intuition because I don't know who I can help today. Like, it's not like that at all.
No.
But it's like, there's more to this than just you. You know, yes, it's you and your relationship with the universe, but it's also you and your relationship to the loved ones around you, to your friends, to your family. And yeah, thank you for sharing. Okay, so we know that some people struggle with exercising their intuition, and I would call it a skill. Like, yes, like I said, it was like a muscle. You have to use it, but it's like a skill that the more you use it, the better it gets for you, the easier, the more natural it feels. So I believe that there are some tips for how to train and improve this skill, if you will, of intuition or our higher knowing. And I wanted to start by sharing, again, another quote by Richard Tarnas. He says, "Our future may well depend upon the precise extent of our willingness to expand our ways of knowing." That's in his Cosmos and Psyche's book, page 40. And so he is a scholar, he's an academic in his field, he's a historian. So to reduce intuition down to nothing but spirituality and just like woo-woo type of thing, then it's very kind of closed-minded. You're cutting yourself off to the possibilities of what could be. And I think that this open-mindedness and this curiosity to explore and develop this relationship between yourself and the universe is the first step to fostering the skill of intuition and this higher knowing. And so just willing to expand your mind and be open to this idea that we are all connected and that through this connection we can be guided. And the next step, I would say, after that is to be present. So if your mind is somewhere else, how can you notice these little subtleties? And if you do happen to catch these little hints, how will you know the source from where it's coming from? So for me, it's one thing to say, oh, it's just a gut instinct. But if you know that it's the universe speaking through you, then you're more inclined to take it more seriously and heed the instinctual messages, the whatever you're feeling like you need to do in the moment. You don't always understand why you get gut feelings, like you said earlier, that you don't know where it's coming from. It's just with it coming from within. You can't explain how or why. It's just there. But actually, if you do think, oh, this must be the universe saying to me that this is important, you're more inclined to do what you're feeling inside because you know the source. So
that makes sense. So starting with an open mind is the first prerequisite, because if you're very close to it, you're stuck in your head. You'll go based off of what's in your intellect, and that's all reasoning.
You don't want to get stuck in your mind.
The mind can be a very scary place to get stuck in.
The mind is very limiting as well. It's very limiting. The universe doesn't speak to your mind. It speaks to your unconscious, through your
consciousness.
And your mind is just a functionality.
It's a very small part of it, for sure. I read a book all about training to be psychic, not necessarily intuition.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, it was just a book from the warehouse, but it was a good book, and it had lots of exercises in it. The exercises, they required a lot of effort, so unfortunately I haven't done any of them, but I read the book. And I intend to practice them at some stage because I'm very curious about these things. And being open-minded, I will never write something off. I want to try it and see if it works for me. Because when you have someone say, oh, that's a lot of Tommy rot, that's rubbish. On what basis? I had my brother did the rice experiment where you have different jars of rice, fresh rice, and you say kind words to one jar, you say bad negative words like I hate you to another jar, and then you don't say anything to the control jar. And a lot of people tried this experiment, and the jar that receives the negative energy rots the fastest or goes moldy the fastest.
Wow.
So when my brother was sharing with some people we knew about it, they immediately said, oh, that's ridiculous. It must have just been the time it took you to close the jar. One got more bacteria than the other. And he went, well, I don't know. I just followed it exactly. I sterilized all the jars.
Yeah,
and
treated them all the same way except for giving the negative positive.
Exactly. But they just assumed it couldn't be caused by energy, as if they're the final authority on all things to do with energy. That happens a lot these days, where people, because they cannot perceive, it therefore is untrue. But there's a lot that we cannot perceive to the mind's eye, even that is yet to be brought to existence, that we still don't even know exists in the universe, in life, and that's the Western mind being like, we know everything and we say what is real and what's not real. Yeah, we decide. It's that arrogance. It's like someone, if you grew up in a small town and you'd never been overseas and you said, well, France isn't real because I've never seen it. So you're saying anything about it and your judgment is neither here nor there.
The same principle applies to people who invalidate other people's feelings. It's the same thing. It's like, you can't be feeling that way because it doesn't make sense to me.
Oh, yes. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. And it's like, it doesn't have to make sense to you for it to be real.
Yeah. Someone's experience is their experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so this book did have some tips on how to train your intuition. And they were all things like, say, if you are opening the newspaper, before you read through it, just get quiet and try and get a feeling of how you feel what is going to be in the content, and then open it and read it and see how much was correct. And it could be when you're opening the mail or anything where you're about to check something, see what your feeling is without checking it, and then check it. And so that's one method that they offered that you could slowly use to train your intuition. Definitely, it doesn't help if you keep not listening to it and then you can realize that you didn't follow it in retrospect. So I would say another tip is, if you do notice that really small feeling, act on it. And as you said, it's a muscle. So the more you practice with it, the more you'll get used to working off of that sense rather than just your head. Have you come across anything in astrology about intuition? Is there anything like some signs are more predisposed towards having a better intuition? Do any of us get better? Do we get dealt better cards around that?
You know, it's actually an interesting question, because I'm thinking about it, and so I'm taking an astrology course, traditional astrology, and what I thought I knew leading into the course has just proven to be not untrue, but it's just made me question a lot of what I thought I knew, because a lot of what I knew was the pop culture astrology, like, oh, Cancerians are very nurturing, and Leos are very, not self-centered, but just like to be the center of attention and love everyone to look at them. And not saying that that's like a negative thing, but, so I definitely knew that there were the water signs that were more intuitive by nature. So that's the thing, like Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces. But now that I'm studying, I'm realizing that the zodiac signs are so multivalent. There's so much to them, and they all encompass these things like intuition, thinking, intellect, all these skills. They all encompass them, but they reach their they reach these kinds of inner knowings through different means. So it's not to say that a Libra is not intuitive because it's not a water sign. A Libra could be intuitive just maybe through other means, and I can't really think off the top of my head any solid examples, but do you know what I mean? Like, it's just different flavors and different styles and different ways of reaching a similar similar
outcome. So
yeah,
could it be that I'm just guessing here, because I don't know a lot about astrology, but if I imagine one type of knowing would be they get a feeling in their gut and they follow it, and another kind would be someone says, I feel like I need to check the mail or check the weather, or they go do something to verify, but they start with a feeling. Is that, could that be different ways of following intuition? Yeah,
it could be exactly, as you said. So for example, I'll say a Cancerian, because I am Cancer. My sun and moon is in Cancer and Mars, so I have a lot of planets in there in my 7th house, and so I have the sense of knowing comes easy to me. I just follow my feelings. That's my mantra. Like, I feel. That is literally words that come out of my mouth the most often than anything else. It's like, I feel this, I feel that, and I go and act on those feelings. So it's very prominent in me. But I would say for other signs that may not be water signs, like an earthy...
Like me, for example, I'm a Taurus.
Yeah.
I was
going to say an earthy Taurus.
What are my prospects?
Well, Taurus, interesting. Let me just say that.
You're being very diplomatic here.
Maybe a Taurus might be at home in their own comforts, just chilling, reading their favorite book and eating their favorite snacks, and then maybe something in the book might prompt them to be like, oh, actually this reminds me, I need to go and do this, and you go off and do it. But it wasn't the act of just feeling. You weren't in your feels at that moment. You were just doing something that you like. So I think maybe what I'm trying to get at here is that when you are in your creative space and in like a harmonious space of your life, whatever the environment, whatever's going on internally, whatever that looks like, that's going to speak to you from within. So, for example, I use that example of you on the couch reading your favorite book, eating your favorite snacks, and then that was when that allowed you to free up your mind to be like, or your inner knowing to speak to you more loudly and be like, oh, you don't know how or why you came to this inner knowing that you needed to go and check the mail, but you decided, oh, I'm going to go check the mail, even though I'm sitting here comfortably on my couch. Go check the mail, and then there's, a letter from your mum or something, and it was like really heartfelt and warm and loving. It's like, wow, like how do I, you know what I mean? Like, so you were in the environment that allowed the universe to really speak to you.
That makes a lot of sense. And while you were saying that, I was thinking that another tip that could help people is to cut out the noise.
Yeah. You definitely have to cut out the just overdoing it and overworking yourself and allowing yourself the quiet space to be with your thoughts. And I don't want to say we should meditate, but because I feel like we say that every episode, like it's always the answer to everything.
Meditation is a good thing.
But even for the extroverted signs like Sagittarius, Aries, Leo, maybe being in isolation and solitude may not be the answer for them. Maybe they need to be around, say for example, a Leo loves to be doted on, loves to be around family, loves to be surrounded by people who love them, and they in turn reciprocate that love back. And maybe when they're in the space of being with their close loved ones, maybe that's where they get their most, their strongest inner knowings. I took an intuition course. It was just, I think it was like an 8-week course. It was not that long at all. It was beginning of last year, when I was kind of starting out on this spiritual journey of mine. And the lessons that we were taught was nothing special about it. It was pretty much just sit there and go through the guided meditation and visualize and then note what you saw. And there were blind readings, meaning our facilitator, our teacher, she would have a question in mind, but she wouldn't reveal it to us. She would guide us through the meditation, and then we wrote down what we saw in our mind's eye, journaling what we saw. And then it wasn't till after we finished the meditation, the guided meditation, then she reveals the question to us. So, for example, during the guided meditation, I don't know why, I don't know the question, but I'm just sitting there in my thoughts, visualizing, and then I'm writing like, oh, I see this yellow rose and it's turned into like a tree, and it's a very big strong tree with a looks to be bright big and green and like luscious and all that kind of thing, right? So I'm just writing, it doesn't make sense to me, but I'm just doing it anyway, writing whatever I see in my mind. And then after that, she will say, now the question to that is, what is your relationship with your significant partner, or with, and then it's like, oh, okay, so, I would liken a tree to being strong and sturdy and stable. You know what I mean? Like you then piece
then
it together. But
add that meaning to it.
Yeah. But so the point of sharing all of that was, although the guided meditations were like 30 minutes long, and we're writing there and we're journaling and we're scribbling and we're drawing what we're seeing, even though we don't know, it doesn't make sense to us, she said that ultimately using your intuition, you don't always have the luxury of sitting there in 30 minutes of silence and jotting down things. So you have to get to a place where you can just get this inner knowing on the go, when you're going out the door, when you're driving to work, so it's great as baby steps to sit down, meditate on it, and train it that way. But eventually you want to be quick and just have it be immediate and be like, I know what I need to do now,
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so training for when you need it on the fly.
Exactly. Because the universe doesn't time it and it's like, I'm just going to wait for 6:30 a.m. when Bianca gets up to do her meditation to give her all the answers that she needs for the day. Like, that's not how the universe works.
If only.
Yeah, so the ultimate goal is to get into a position of trusting ourselves enough to be able to trust in what we are seeing within, even if it doesn't make sense to us. We still do it anyway, and then it's only after the fact that it makes sense to us.
Yeah, so there's a lot of tips in there.
Yeah.
Getting quiet and not being swayed by the voices of others. Because especially if you've got everyone's voices in your head, how are you going to hear your own voice?
Yes.
So
yes, getting quiet. Yeah.
Getting quiet. And meditation, I still think, is a good practice for people to have.
Regardless of whether it's to train and strengthen your intuition, it's just good all around. So,
that's right. Yeah. And when you meditate, you learn to become the observer. Then when you go out into the world,
I love that.
You have learned to observe everything. And ideally, you're observing inside and out. So inside is where those messages are going to come from, as long as you continually stay present and you're curious. So, okay, well, I'm feeling something in my stomach, in my heart. What is that? Oh, maybe this person has bad intentions towards me, or they're judging me, or they're not an ally at work, so I need to be cautious of them. Those feelings that come up.
That's also an element of being present. So, yeah.
And it would be so easy to brush it off and say, oh no, but you can often sense these things.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I love that you mentioned that in the course there was journaling as well. I think this is a great way to tap into a part of yourself while letting go of the intellectual mind. You see a lot of mediums in some of these documentaries about mediums, and some of them scribble circles on a piece of paper while they're channeling because it helps them get out of their head. So that's a method they use to tap into their intuition. So if you're journaling and writing, you're kind of accessing a deeper part of yourself that's not the shallow everyday chit-chat part. And another thing that could be helpful for whoever is so inclined is to ask your higher self for guidance. So when you frame a question and put it into the depths of your heart or your gut, then you're getting very specific about the kind of information you want to access from source.
Yeah.
You can say the question, and that's not something that's just like a magical practice. I think it's quite practical. So years ago, the first time I was introduced to meditation and hypnosis, that was one of the things that we learned At the time, I was working with binaural beats, which is a kind of brain wavelength technology that brings you into a very calm state to access your deep inner knowing. And once the technology brought you into this state, then they said, okay, now ask the question that you really need an answer to and wait for the answer. It will rise up in this deep, dark, quiet space. I found it so amazing.
Wow. Yes. I love that you got that you get the answer. Sometimes we don't. And I was thinking, as you were sharing that, of just recollecting some of the experiences that I've had, even just this week. I mean, because listening to intuition really doesn't have to be a profound prophetic experience.
Yeah, it can be really practical and basic.
Very practical. It's like to use it every day. It's very much using it for the mundane things. And what I would do, and what I did this week, was I would, in the morning, while I'm getting ready for work, I will play podcasts. And I've got a astrology podcast that I like to listen to. Well, a couple of them that I like to listen to. And I also have a couple of books that I'm listening on Audible. So, there's just a lot of books and podcasts and stuff that I'm consuming. And there was something in the lecture that we had the other week, the most recent lecture that we had in the ancient astrology course that I'm taking. And we were learning about this new concept that I wasn't quite sure about. And so I was pondering on it, and I decided to just quickly note down my thoughts. Some of them were just a couple bullet points, and then a few questions came from that, and I wrote down the questions and then carried on with my morning. And as I was listening to the podcast, as I normally do, as I'm getting ready in the morning, I feel like I got my answers through that podcast. And the thing is that what's happening here is, when you don't know something, and because you're developing this intuition, if you put it out there, if you write notes, if you put it on your phone or something like that, you just make a note of the queries that you have, the universe answers those in its own time, but the universe will answer you. And I recognized that it was answering me through the podcast that I was listening to. How crazy is it to think that the very couple of things that I was very unsure about, that I didn't know how to interpret, I didn't know how to understand, they get answered through and I wasn't even trying to find answers. I was just like, I'm just putting this podcast on, I'm getting ready. I'm not thinking, I'm not attached to that question that I had written down. I've written it down, and it's now gone from my memory. I'm just doing my daily routine. So for when it showed up, when the theme was spoken about in the podcast, I was like, wait, this is related to what I was just asking in my little meditation query thing. And I was like, wow, the universe is really on my side here. It's like, oh yeah, we got you, Bianca. This is your answer. I'm going to put it through this podcast that you felt inclined to listen to this morning.
Yeah, it's definitely, there is I think, it is magical to look at it that way. And sometimes things, the way they play out, just leave you with a sense of wonder that something bigger could be at play. I'm reminded, again, talking about mundane things, and this week, my son wanted to go to a particular store, and he said that he wanted to hang out there for an hour, and that then I should come in and collect him an hour later. So I said, cool, you wait there and promise to meet me here in 1 hour, and I'm going to go over there. So I was in my car, and I actually lost track of time. So when I was meant to go and pick him up, the store had actually closed 5 minutes ago. And I was thinking, oh no, how am I going to find him? Because the store is closing and he doesn't have his phone on him, and we agreed to meet there. So I was a little bit worried that we were going to miss each other. And when I was going to the mall, just as I was coming up to the place where you could drive into the mall, there were a few different car parks that I could go into. And I was thinking, you know what? It might take me a long time to find him now that I've missed this chance to meet him at the store we said that we talked about. So where should I go? And I just followed that gut feeling. And I wasn't worried or panicked, but I also knew intellectually that there was a high chance that we would struggle to find each other, and I had no idea in my mind how we were going to find each other. And I followed this feeling. I drove in, and I drove to a particular place, and I parked up, and I calmly got out, and the mall was closed already, and I could see the security guards walking around. And I just walked up to the door that was locked, and as I walked up in the whole mall, my son went past that door that I walked up to.
Oh, wow.
And I knocked on the door, and then he came to me, and they let him out.
Wow.
And that was just that higher knowing, that feeling.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like when you lean into that, that intuitive gut instinct, the universe takes care of the rest. That's really what I believe.
Yes, and if you've never listened to your intuition, a helpful thing to think of can be think of it as a feeling in your heart or your stomach. Usually it feels like something coming from those two places, and it doesn't talk. So it's not the chit-chat monkey mind chatter. It's just a feeling, and it doesn't have words that go with it. So that's how you know that it's the intuition and not your intellect going, but what about this? What about that? Oh, if I go here, that's something else.
Yeah.
And I think that you also have to trust it and act on it without second guessing it. Because as soon as you start second guessing it, you're not going to get anywhere. And then that muscle will become weaker and weaker. And then you won't feel those feelings anymore at all.
Yeah.
So to summarize, I think we've seen that intuition is a kind of wisdom, seemingly beyond reason, that comes from a higher aspect of our being. And it is very practical. It can save us in times of danger and guide us in our decisions, big and small. The way we can cultivate it is by engaging in practices that nourish this subtle wisdom. That's having internal trust, quieting the mind, and practicing acting on that strong feeling without questioning it with the intellect. I know this will be helpful for people out there. Thank you so much for spending the past hour with us. And remember, the path to your best reality is in your hands to create when you become conscious.